everyone, guys. I'm very glad to see you all again. Today we have such a serious topic, how to stop suffering. Let's break down the system into its components so that it's clear where all this suffering actually comes from. Why do we subconsciously strive for this? And why do we actually choose to suffer? Because it's a choice. So why does suffering arise in the first place? Suffering is a generalized term. It can involve all sorts of things. Negative emotions. We feel overwhelmed and dissatisfied when we find ourselves in certain situations. It's basically the gap between the situation we idealize as favorable and desirable and the situation we actually have in reality. And so there is a gap between them. And because of this, we suffer. There is situation A, which is desired, and there is situation B, which is the reality that we are dissatisfied with. Why? It seems to us that situation A is more favorable than situation B because there is a certain accumulation of information, a belief that we have been storing in our box throughout our existence. There is something that compares situations, evaluates them, and then a reaction occurs. So it's actually a pretty simple process. You compare it with your past experiences, and then you give a reaction. Your reaction can be negative or positive. The main question, who is responsible for this evaluation? We are energy that encompasses absolutely everything that can and cannot be imagined. Any outcomes of events, material and immaterial aspects, ideas, objects, reactions, processes, all spaces and times of all civilizations. So this is exactly everything that you are. And there is a certain construct that gathered certain experiences, certain material, sees a certain situation, compares this situation with what he has gathered, and gives a reaction based on his information accumulations. Why do we all live our different lives? Every person has different reference base that they compare things to, certain events or situations happening to them. Let me give you an analogy for simplicity. Your mind works exactly on the same principle as artificial intelligence. If you've ever tried how ChatGPT works or some other programs that generate, for example, images, it's a really cool illustration of how artificial intelligence works. Gathers a resource base, meaning all the images that exist on the internet, loads this huge database, and depending on the request, it gives out some answers based on its information accumulations. That's exactly how your mind works. But there's one nuance here. It's clear that the information accumulations are limited. Let's say you're 30 years old or however old you are. 50, 40, 18, 20, and over the years you have grown within a certain situation, within a certain environment, you have gathered specific insights. All of this gets stored in this very database, and all future situations that happen to you are compared against it. Let's go back to what I said. You are not a body, not a person, and not a mind. You are so much more than that. You are a particle of eternal, infinite potential energy. There are certain boxes where these scenarios have accumulated over a certain period of time, depending on which body a piece of your consciousness is in from which you are observing. Essentially, the situations you encounter are all completely neutral. In general, this matrix in which you live, in which we all live, it is absolutely neutral. As soon as the mind gets involved, it starts with the good and the bad. Bad weather, that's bad. No money, that's bad. But having money is good, and having a partnership or a new business is good. That is some reference values that you pull out of this box of yours. That is, you understand how much these judgments are subjective, especially considering that these beliefs can be polar opposites for different people. If it's good for a Russian, then it's death for a German, to put it simply. You see, it's just absurd. So you, being a creator, being absolutely everything that exists, having limitless power, capable of materializing absolutely everything you want at cosmic speed, you start to assess the situation from the perspective of your mind. Your box with a very limited set of reference points. Of course, you suffer because there is a direct mismatch between one and the other. Your mind, it has no idea and can't evaluate anything that's not in its reference base. The problem is that he took the dominant mechanism. He took power over everything you identify with. This is where the main problems lie, but in reality, it's just a tool, just like your ears. For example, there are ears that hear and eyes that see. There are 5 senses, right? And you gave your mind the power to evaluate things that it fundamentally can't assess objectively. No matter how old you are, surely you're not 100 years old. Even if you were 100, 500,000, or even 1 billion years old, just imagine being 1 billion years old. Even under those conditions, you wouldn't be able to objectively assess what's happening because your essence, it is infinitely eternal. There is eternity upon eternity. As deeply as we understand the meaning of this word, a billion years is a completely insignificant number compared to eternity. Even if your mind had 1 billion years worth of information storage, it would still be completely incompetent. to assess what's happening, and it wouldn't be able to grasp the full depth and completeness of the situation that's right in front of you, which you're evaluating from the perspective of your 30-year-old box. I hope I'm explaining myself clearly. Unable to understand why you are going through this experience. The situation you are currently experiencing may seem tragic, sad to you in the moment, and worthy of suffering. Nothing in this world, believe me, is worthy of suffering. But it seems that way to you right now, yet your mind is simply unable to even foresee what the next moment will bring. Now, I'll just give an example, not very cheerful, but very illustrative. You found yourself, for example, in a transit airport. I had a case like that once, and you lost your passport. Well, of course, that's a reason for suffering, probably in the moment. And then you realize that the plane you were supposed to board crashed, but in the moment when you lost your passport at the airport, you probably didn't think about that. You were suffering in the moment because you lost your passport in a foreign country. You were thinking, oh my God, what am I supposed to do now? I'll be like in the movie, The Terminal. I won't be able to go anywhere at all or fly anywhere. Your mind is unable to see the bigger picture. So it makes sense to trust your inner, true, and authentic self, the infinite, eternal you deep within, the potential of the energy that chooses the only scenario for you. Because the concept of good and bad is made up by the mind, your little box. There is no good or bad. There is no duality. There is only being. And the only one ideal, optimal version of existence of being. There's no point in worrying. It happens on its own. You don't decide anything here. Your mind has taken on the role of the doer who supposedly decides what happens, what to do, and how. But that's not what he does. He simply registers and appropriates it. It has been proven by science that your mind registers the decision made milliseconds later, after it has actually been made. It doesn't make the decision. It merely registers the decision that has been made. And then, you know what it does? It assigns it to itself. He says, I made this decision, this idea came to me, I came up with this plan, but it has already happened. And he just registered that fact. It all just happens very quickly. You don't notice it in time. It's like in the movie The Matrix. The movie The Matrix is genius. In general, there are a huge number of films in mainstream cinema that try to explain what's happening. Basically, you are trying to explain to yourself through cinema what is happening. People don't really read these signs correctly and perceive them just as entertaining movies. Actually, these are very serious films. When Neo chooses the red pill, he thinks before making the choice, and Morpheus tells him, you've already made the choice. Right now, you're just trying to understand why you made it. Okay, let's get back to how to stop suffering. Long story short, first of all, it really helps to become aware of yourself, to take a step back and understand that you are evaluating the situation from the perspective of a little box that you've put together. Acknowledge the insignificance of this little box and acknowledge the greatness of yourselves. Acknowledge the infinite greatness of yourselves as the infinitely wise eternity, because that is who you are. And then you'll laugh because it will become funny. Stop listening to your artificial intelligence. You can make it more objective by upgrading it with some books, new experiences. You can break a couple of patterns, give your mind the place it deserves. Put it back in its place, because it has its place alongside all the other senses. Just register, just help in achieving some goals. But don't take the leading position. The leading position, the steering wheel, should be in your present, not in your mind. Because even if you upgrade it with all possible techniques, practices, meditations, literature, vipassanas, ayavaskas, pre-open faiths, it will still search obstacles to limit, because its essence is limitation, its essence is duality. It tries to use emotions based on the duality of separation. If there were no separation, there would be no mind. Our game is set up in such a way that there is a mind that by mistake took the wheel. And if you start repeating it to yourself consistently, at some point, you'll sit down and just start laughing so hard because you'll realize how much you're fooling yourself. And you'll realize how limitless your power is and how you're sabotaging it by listening to your mind. In this way, your suffering will go away, definitely not right away. After all, it's about neural connections, and these patterns always leave with pain. And it may take some time. It's just a path, a lot or a little. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. Trust the process.